Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kiera Vaclavik, and I'm a professor in the Department of Modern Languages and Cultures and Comparative Literature here in the School of the Arts at Queen Mary. And I'm joined by Nu. Would you like to introduce yourself, Nu, and just say what you're studying at Queen Mary?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm new. I'm in my fourth year, which is my final year, and I'm studying comparative literature and film studies.
And it's a fourth year because Nu is doing comparative literature and film with a year abroad. So you spent last year in New York City, didn't you?
Yes, I did. It was a really great experience, and I can talk a little bit more about it and explain how that is integrated part of the program as well a little bit later on. So stick around if you want to hear about that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nu. And yeah, it's very apt and appropriate that you had a year abroad, given what we're going to be doing today. So in comparative literature, we look at texts in different languages from around the world. We also look at the ways that works move across the world, usually in translation, and also how they move across media. Today's session is going to focus on a work that hasn't just moved across the world and across media. It has done those things, as we'll see, but it's also actually about these things. So we're going to be looking at Jules Verne's Le Tour du Monde en 80 jours, around the world in 80 days, or 80 days around the world. This session is essentially going to be a shortened version of a class which fits within the second year module, which we call To Be Continued, Adaptations of Global Literary Classics, which Nu studied before she went off to New York in her third year. So she did it in her second year. In that module, To Be Continued, we look at theories of adaptation to start with, and then we look at 3 case studies. For each of these, we first look at a given source text. This year, we're looking at the graphic novel Persepolis. We're also looking at the Decameron and then Lewis Carroll's Alice books. So we look at the given source text, and then we chart out its adaptation history before then focusing on a particular version of that text. And that's also the format for what we're going to be doing together today. So let's make a start with the text. So Jules Verne was a French writer born in 1828 and he died in 1905. He made his literary debut as an only relatively modestly successful writer for theatre, which is worth bearing in mind when we come on to look at adaptations later. His defining moment came in 1862 when he signed the first of several contracts with the publisher, editor and writer Pierre-Jules Hetzel. Hetzel launched a publication which became really famous and well received, called the Magasin d'Éducation et de Récréation. It was published every fortnight, and it combined kind of news and literature and was aimed at a family audience. So this magazine of education and entertainment, and Hetzel had this really specific role in mind for Jules Verne. He wanted him to bring readers the latest scientific knowledge, and by science here he had in mind things like geography and astronomy, as well as kind of what we'd think of as the sciences. And he wanted him to do that in an accessible and appealing format. We'd probably now say that Verne was being tasked with bringing science and technology to life through storytelling. The text that we're going to be looking at today, Le Tour du Monde, dates from 1872. And it really does what it says on the tin. Has anybody read the original text, or either in French or in the translation, or has anybody encountered any version of it? You could say yes or no in the chat, or you could also, I think, react with a thumbs up. or can you do a thumbs down? Is that possible? No, I don't think you can do a thumbs down. But do say in the chat whether you have whether you've experienced it in any way. Okay, good to know. That's fine. I'm not assuming that anybody will have experienced it in any way. So I'm not going to say exactly what happens, but I'll give you some sense of what the plot involves. So it's the story of the Englishman Phileas Fogg, Fogg, who accepts a bet that he can travel around the world in 80 days or less. So remember, this is 1872. This is pre-planes. So a very different kind of backdrop to the one that we're in currently. Can anybody guess how long it might take, just to give you a sense of, so 80 days is 2.5 months. How long do you think it took to cross the Atlantic at the beginning of the 19th century? You can put your answers in the chat. How long did it take to cross the Atlantic at the beginning of the 19th century, approximately? Okay, we have one guess, which is 10 days. So this is like around 1800. There's another one or two on the way. 60 days. 60 days. I've got to figure out my maths now. Oh, hang on. Oh, somebody's going to have to figure out the maths for me. At the beginning of the 19th century, it took 4 to 6 weeks to cross the Atlantic. How many days is that? 24. So a bit, not quite as long as that, but a long time. What technological development sped, thank you very much for providing the maths, what technological development sped this up massively? So at the beginning of the 19th century, you would have been taking 4 to 6 weeks to sail across the Atlantic. It's steam that changes everything. By the 1870s, which is when this text is being produced, steamships had reduced the crossing time to between somewhere in the region of what one of you has actually suggested. So by the 1870s, we got to between 7 and 10 days to cross the Atlantic. And by 1889, the fastest crossings were under 6 days. Nevertheless, I mean, this is still days rather than hours, which is what it would take now. And on land, this was about rolling out the railway. So the equivalent of sail ships to steam is also happening on land with the introduction of railways across various different continents. The other really important development that Veln was responding to with this text is the opening of the Suez Canal in the Middle East in 1869. So this is really, it's technology that is changing the way that travel was possible, travel and commerce and industry generally. So the opening of the Suez Canal was a really significant in opening up kind of transport circuits and trade circuits across the world. The route that the travellers take in his text crosses the Middle East, goes very, very quickly across Europe, but it dwells a lot more on the Middle East, then particularly India, goes through Hong Kong and Japan, and then there's also a journey across the United States before coming back to London, where the journey begins. So Veln's first readers were encountering the text live, essentially. It was very nearly in real time. The events of the story take place between the 2nd of October and the 22nd of December, 1872. The story appeared in regular instalments in the appropriately named Le Temps newspaper, so the Times newspaper, from the 6th of November to the 22nd of December. So the initial time lag of about a month was made up over the course of the serial installments, and what we'd now refer to as the kind of season finale or the grand finale of the story took place on the very day of the final publication. So the events of the 22nd of December 1872 in the story were also being published on the 22nd of December 1872 in the real world. And of course, time and speed is absolutely of the essence here. The bet is all about whether you can make it round the world in a given amount of time. Accordingly, and it's fair to say in a manner not always true of Jules Verne's writing, the narrative is really zippy and really pacey. It's quite a sort of breathless read. So once it was initially then published in serial installments, and then what happens is that it is published with illustrations in 1873 by that publisher that I mentioned earlier, Etzel. So when it gets published in volume form, this is in 1873, the very next year, it's accompanied by 56 illustrations by Alphonse de Neuville and Léon Bennett. So you're looking at a couple of the images of those 56 here, the images which weren't in the original serial publication at all, but which come into the novel version. Essentially kind of break up the text. There's about one image per chapter. They serve to concretize details, as you can see here with this, with the steam train. They also, as you can see in this next image, give kind of panoramas. They give a sense of where the events are happening. They offer a certain amount of spectacle and exoticism. The whole story is about the distance closing rapidity of modern life. It bears all the hallmarks of modernity, including a, for us, really recognizable global consciousness. The world has shrunk. That's what makes a race like this possible. Travel is really fast, really rapid and frictionless. And English towns, English speaking towns are everywhere. So this already in 1872. Verne integrates into his story modern modes of communication, the newspaper, the telegraph, and the plot depends on the latest feats of technology, engineering, and transportation. Now, people were already undertaking circumnavigations and had been doing this for centuries. So going around the world in and of itself is not new, but it's the speed with which it's undertaken, which makes this story a kind of whole, the plot of this story, an entirely different sort of undertaking. Another feature of the text's modernity, so it's really kind of cutting edge, is the way in which Verne taps into various different literary developments and publishing innovations. He takes the nascent crime or detective genre and globalizes it. So crime and detective fiction is starting at this point, but he kind of does a global version of it, and he has a bank job and an international manhunt as the text's main subplot. So these are things that, you know, we're very familiar with now, but in 1872, this was pretty new. So in all then, it's very, it's all about time, this text, and it's very much of its time, with all that that implies and entails. It's a race predicated on a very clear vision of race. The whole thing assumes a shared understanding of racial and other hierarchies, and of domination, mastery, and collateral damage. In the final race to the finish, I won't tell you exactly what happens. I will say, though, that 5 carriages are hit and 2 dogs get run over. They are simply collateral damage. Nobody cares about the dogs at all. But I would say that one critic's claim about the, quote, unparalleled readability, end quote, of this text is pretty dubious, I would say. Not just because of the dead dogs, the text is often, it often makes for really highly uncomfortable reading for us today. And it poses considerable problems for adapters. We'll come back to this in a moment. What I want to look at before we get on to the adaptations quite briefly is just to think about the hero and the heroine of this work and how they are presented. So readers apprehend Phileas Fogg uniquely from the outside. They never have the opportunity to pierce his outward appearance. And this is how the illustrators rendered his outward appearance in the novel version. We know what he does, which is itself really limited. He eats, he reads his newspaper, and he plays whist. But despite extensive speculation on the part of the narrator, we have no idea what he thinks or feels. And indeed, we're repeatedly told that he feels nothing at all. In the face of the various obstacles that he confronts, and that's basically all he does throughout the whole text, is kind of come up against all of these difficulties, we're constantly on the lookout for a response of some kind, of a sign of despair or irritation or frustration. But it never comes. Only when the game is, he thinks, up, does he finally lash out. So he's a kind of machine, and there's a lot of emphasis on that. Though this man that we're encouraged to regard as a machine, as an emotionless automaton, does though evolve and develop. The mechanical quality which dominates his characterization in the majority of the text is framed by lashing out at the end, as we've seen, and by this act of pure impulse, which is the accepting of the bet right at the beginning. And lots of critics have drawn attention to the text's incorporation and of nascent psychological thinking. So this is another way in which the novel is very much of its time. So the sciences of psychology, again, are, in their really in their infancy in the 1870s. And so Verne is also drawing on this kind of thinking. He even uses the word inconsciemment, or unconsciously, some 4 years before it makes its first appearance into a dictionary. So this is to give you a sense of how of its time, and indeed ahead of its time in this sense, it is. So that's so much for Fogg. What about his heroine? So Verne's heroine, Mrs. Aouda, undergoes a similar sort of invisible transformation. For the vast majority of the text, her portrayal is highly stereotypical and conventional in terms of gender and race. This may come as some surprise based on the image that you're looking at. She's actually an Indian. But within the text, before these images are produced, she's an Indian made acceptable by being thoroughly Europeanized in her behavior. And then you can see that the illustrators are also Europeanizing her in her visual presentation too. She's first encountered by readers in India as a passive victim on the point of immolation on a funeral bier. And she's subsequently lumbered about the world like so much luggage. And she, as opposed to the male characters, is in need of luggage. She eventually emerges, though, so she also does kind of change. She eventually emerges as a gun-toting determiner of her own destiny. Something extraordinary actually happens with Mrs. Aouda. She proposes marriage to Fogg, and not as a sort of missable hint or this is what I do if, in the manner of other 19th century heroines. She comes out with it directly and asks him to marry her. This is very, very unusual in 19th century fiction. So it's really, both of them do change, and there are kind of interesting aspects of their characterization. In respect of her specifically, I would say yes, this is pretty radical. I think the gun-toting, the asking the proposal, but at the same time, it only happens really very briefly, right at the end of the text, that she sort of acquires this level of agency and dynamism. So hopefully this has given you a reasonable sense of the source text that we're working with. What I'm going to do now is to move on to start thinking about the adaptations of this work. So there have been a really vast swathe of adaptations to page, stage and screen. So there's also been lots of print spin-offs and rewritings, and we're going to be looking at some of those in a moment. So the BBC adaptation starring David Tennant that we'll focus on for the final part of this session is really just the latest in a very, very long list of adaptations. It's a really enduring work, and we might want to think about what qualities it has that continue to appeal today. Now, interestingly, and I mentioned that Jules Verne originally started his writing career as a writer for theatre. This text too was originally conceived for the stage by Verne. And when he started writing it in the late 1860s, he was by then an experienced playwright with a number of theatrical productions already under his belt. It didn't sort of work out, the idea of the play didn't work out, and the person that he was working with, it all kind of fell apart. And that's when the story happened instead. But this text then that had its origin as a stage play was indeed quickly adapted to the stage, and a highly successful stage version, complete with real-life elephants and snakes, followed soon after in 1874. So remember that the novel is published as in a full volume, in the complete volume, only in 1873. The very next year, it is already being performed on stage. And this production, a postcard from which you can see here, continued to be popular, really popular, right up until World War II. So it has the stage version itself is really enduring in and of itself. What you're looking at the moment is a postcard. I'm not entirely sure of the date of the postcard. Could you have a look at this and just say what you think the main focus is in terms of the staging? What is it kind of emphasizing, would you say? It is, yeah. So the kind of it's a steamship that we're seeing here. Lots of people. So there's kind of quite a big cast, but also this kind of big spectacle. Remember, there was also a live elephants and snakes. So this is really kind of trying to convey the drama spectacle, the idea of transportation. So this is a fixed theatre, but the idea of trying to convey and to transport, I suppose, also the audience. Good. Okay, so as I said briefly before, and as with this stage version, adaptations tend to cross, or very often cross, media, but not always. We also have what's known as intramedial adaptation. So as well as having page to stage, book to film, you can also have book to other kinds of book. So what you're looking at here is a range of picture books based on 80 days around the world. There's plenty of other examples too. Here is one, and here is another one. There are tens of these versions of the story. What do you think the main task for writers and illustrators is in going from, this is the novel. So this is just to give you a sense of how big it is. So, you know, quite small text, a reasonably large novel. To get from this to this, and I will just give you a sense of what it looks like inside. What is the main job? What do they have to do to deliver those kinds of texts? Yeah, so basically the job, and I love this idea that, you know, you cannot start too soon with, you know, sharing the classics. So this is the big one that you're looking at here is part of a series that is, they're like board books for babies. The big job is to strip out the extraneous details, to get rid of what isn't sort of strictly necessary for the advancement of the story. So yes, it's about condensing, it's about getting to, yeah, the really the essence of the story. Well done, excellent. And to try and convey that both in text and image. So there's something that's sort of similar and something that's a little bit different from the source text that we've already seen. So Verne wasn't really, he wasn't writing with images to start with. Those did come though, as we've seen in the published version. So he had a sense that probably there would be illustrations, but the text had to stand alone. So these texts, these works that you're looking at here really introduced that highly kind of visual component. But in condensing, in this act of condensation, they're sort of also returning very much to what it was that Verne was being briefed to do himself. Remember that his job from Hetzel had been to essentially take the kind of modern scientific knowledge and to make that accessible and readable. And that's also very much what's happening here and in something like this, which is also what you see. What's kind of interesting in with some of these series is that or with some of these works is that they are part of series. So this is one graphic novel, but it's part of, this particular text is part of a whole series of graphic novels which are aiming at familiarizing or introducing young readers to kind of literary classics. Okay, so that's print adaptations. Let's have a look now at screen and television. So what you're looking at here is a selection of films and a television series. So the television series is the slightly blurry one, quite appropriately, given that it is also called Willy Fogg. So you have European and global productions here. That television series was a Spanish production, but also using Japanese animation. And you also have Anglo-American productions from the dates that you can see on the screen. So clearly, as I've already said, this is a story with broad and wide-ranging appeal. What kind of audiences do you think these works are targeting? And why? I sound like Claudia Winkleman now. In Traitors was what I was thinking. Yeah, and so children, why do you think children? Oh, interesting. Yeah, okay, so there are people in the audience who have experienced some of these. The one on the right was also pretty awful. I should say that one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing when studying adaptations is to really think about why it is that we feel that things work or don't work. But the star quality, so there's a comment in the chat about the third one here being really a vehicle for Jackie Chan, and targeting very much his fans. So we might want to think about that when we look at the BBC adaptation in a moment as well. So they are vehicles for kind of stars sometimes too. Yeah, good. So children and families. Why do you think that so you can see two of these works convert animals into convert humans into animals. Why might adapters do that? Why might they convert people into animals, do you think? Yeah, interesting. So animal movies and animal adaptations had been hugely successful with Disney. I think it's about, as that suggests, targeting young people, and an idea that there's a kind of common idea, and I'm not sure that this is necessarily right. There's a common idea that children and animals have a certain affinity. Children are kind of like animals, and so anyway, there's an idea that children particularly like animals, so it may well be about targeting excuse me, a particular audience. I think there's also something going on possibly around race by making the characters animals. You can kind of sidestep some of the quite awkward racial issues within the text. Bearing that in mind, let's move on to the one of the more recent adaptations. So this, interestingly, again, has a European dimension. So it was actually commissioned by the European Alliance, a group of European TV companies. It first premiered on La Une in Belgium on the 5th of December in 2021. And then it later appeared on BBC One from the 26th of December. So it was the Boxing Day. It starts on Boxing Day, and it was every Sunday for about 2 months, something like that. And starred, so again, we have like a big star quality situation here. It starred David Tennant, well-established, respected British actor who crosses kind of the popular and the elite with, you know, roles ranging from Doctor Who to, you know, various different Shakespearean roles. We're going to watch, hopefully, we did try this. We're going to try and watch the trailer together and then have a think about it. So as you're looking at it, I'd like you to just sort of think about what strikes you about it, what your first impressions are. So hopefully this is going to work. Fingers crossed. What are your first impressions about it? What strikes you from the trailer? Yeah. So actually, one thing that I was going to ask you about before, that's interesting that so somebody has said that it's a modern take. In what way is it modern? Because there are definitely ways in which it's not modern. Good. So there's a woman who has agency, and then so it's a kind of, and a black man in an important role. Good. So kind of diversity. And but in what ways is it not modern? Yes, good. So there's a balloon that, and which is actually, the balloon isn't in the novel, but it's in other novels by Verne, and it's very kind of iconic, I suppose. It also connects to other BBC. So somebody else has said it looks very BBC, and it does look very BBC. And I don't know if any of you saw the His Dark Materials adaptation, which was on a little bit earlier, but is a similar kind of period to this. And that very prominently featured a balloon too. So it kind of links, and also the fact that you've got Tennant, who had been on regularly on BBC with Doctor Who as well. So it is very BBC, but it's also kind of, yes, that's true. The balloon is in the text of His Dark Materials. Why very often adaptations modernize, do a modern take, but they don't just do a modern take in their casting, but they update the setting. Why is it not? Why is it? I mean, I've never come across really an example of this, which isn't to say that they don't exist, but they're very unusual. Why are there no, or very few, updatings or modernizations of this text, do you think? Exactly. No, quite. So the sort of premise of the thing about 80, getting around the world in 80 days, no longer pertains. Like now you can do it in 80 hours or fewer. So the basic concept can't really work. So what adapters tend to do now is to graft contemporary concerns through casting and through the storyline, which is what we've already been talking about. So yeah, I'll just show you a few stills from this as well. This is very much about spectacle, this particular adaptation, but I think it's true of many adaptations of 80 Days, very much about spectacle and exoticism, these very grand and elaborate sets, often CGI enhanced. It looks like it was pretty high budget. It's visually really arresting then. There's lots of pace, lots of limit situations, which is very Jules Verne. And that the first, the trailer, and in fact, the first episode ends on a very literal high in the form of the balloon, as we've been talking about. And that balloon also links into a kind of what you might have picked up on from some of this is a kind of real steampunk aesthetic, which links not just to Jules Verne, but to other BBC adaptations too. So there's this kind of like prestige, there's this kind of BBC prestige going on here. The question of diversity and representation, which you've picked up on too, is very kind of striking, as is the representation of the hero. So we have a black servant and a woman journalist. According to the text and illustrations, Passepartout was white. The female character in the text is rescued in India and eventually marries Fogg. In this series, the female character is much more dynamic. She's a career girl. Fogg does still have a love interest, but the plot is slightly different to allow for that. Just on the point of the hero, how is the hero portrayed? You can already see it, I think, in the trailer. And how does it differ from what you've understood? the representation from the text. Yeah, much more emotional. Yeah, a caricatural Englishman. Is he yeah, so definitely not the kind of machine. A bit of a kind of unlikely hero, right? So the kind of, you know, the seasickness, the kind of the fact that, you know, he's sort of plagued by various different quite minor matters. So it's he's much more comedic. I think he's the butt of a lot more humor than in the source text. And I think it's interesting to consider the length, you know, this is a series rather than just a film. And I think it's worth considering, I don't know this for sure, but I wonder what it would be like to approach an actor like Tennant and say, for 12 episodes, you are going to be totally reactionless. You're going to do absolutely nothing. So I think that partly it's about that. It's about, and also the fact that we kind of have audiences expect sort of depth of character and complexity and things like this. I am just looking at the time. There's so much more that we could say about this particular adaptation and adaptation more broadly. In terms of taking this further, I hope that this has inspired you to look up reviews of this particular series. They're really interesting. Large, I mean, it didn't do too badly. There was originally a plan for there to be a second series, and it was left with that as a possibility at the end of this series. That hasn't happened, but do look up reviews of it. Also, if this has whetted your appetite, look out for other adaptations of 80 Days in different media. Be alert to how race and gender are handled in other adaptations that you encounter. I will now, I think, open up the floor for any questions that you might have about anything that we've talked about today, or about the comparative literature programme at Queen Mary, anything really that you would like to ask me, and Nu, who has been sitting here waiting for this opportunity to talk about her experiences of being a student of this programme. Is there anything that you would like to ask? There are some questions coming in, which I'm just waiting for now. While we're waiting for these, Nu, do you want to say what you have liked most about your studies in comparative literature and film, and particularly comparative literature?
Yes, well, I think both kind of doing both degrees has been quite interesting. You don't realize how much they interrelate with each other and how much knowledge you use in film studies to comparative literature and comparative literature to film studies. I really, I mean, I really enjoyed Kiera's module of adaptation. That was actually one of my favorite, not just saying that because we're on here as well. And it's made me a lot more aware about what's kind of new, what isn't new, but also how stories have actually essentially come from like 7 storylines within the world and how they just keep on getting reimagined, adapted, but also different way that people find creative thinking of putting it out in the world.
Yeah.
So
and there's a question about period and whether 19th century material is common. versus kind of more contemporary stuff. I mean, I guess I would say that actually by the lens of adaptation means that essentially we are looking at modern material here, even though the source text is older. But new, maybe you could talk a little bit about Com 300 and what the kind of contemporary materials that you're working with in that module, or in other more contemporary texts that you've looked at in other modules during your degree.
Yeah, so I think with the modules that you're doing as well, when it comes to interest, if you do have a bigger interest in 19th century novels, you can the modules that you are given, there are some that includes that, and there are some that don't and includes more modern text. So it really is up to your choice in second and third year when you're picking out what you want to study for the next year. I do, me personally, I study a lot of more modern text. That's just where my interest lies. And that, but then I have also, but I do also study a lot of kind of like 19th century and 18th century text as well. So it is a bit of both. And due to your personal preferences, right now we're looking at like Virginia Woolf and her status in the canon, like the literature canon as a whole. But I'm also doing quite a controversial module called Sex and Scandal, which is looking at how like novels from back in the 1800s to modern day had developed in kind of with erotica, and like with the development of like understanding of how people have written about erotica back then and now. So it is very varied, and it's very interesting because you get to kind of pick where your interest lies as well.
Yeah, so I would say that one of the things about the department actually as well is that we have a really, not only a really good geographical span, so there are people who work on who have Arabic and work on Caribbean literature, who work on Indian literature, who work on Indonesian literature, who work on European literature. So there's that, but we also have a really good temporal and chronological spread too. So you can and will be studying literature with us from the kind of classical period right up until the present day. So there's also a lot of expertise in kind of Caribbean literature and of the contemporary period, lots of kind of 20th century post-colonial literature as well. So there is a really big spread. And the other thing that I think is important to say is, as Nu is saying, is that you actually have quite a lot of choice over what you want to focus on. So at the moment in the adaptation module, we have a 14th century Italian text, we have a 21st century French text, and we have a 19th century English text. And then we're looking at their adaptations across time. So the 14th century Boccaccio text, the Decameron, it has just recently been made into a Netflix series. So again, it gives you that sense of the kind of temporal span. I'm just waiting for Sanya's. Oh, I'm waiting for a student's question. Sorry, somebody who's in the audience. Just waiting for one question. Sorry, I don't think there's any way that anybody could find you. If you give a summary of your experiences, comparative literature, what does it consist of? Is it basically like literature and media combined? Yeah, so so it's half and half, isn't it? It's half of both degrees.
Yes, it is half of both degree. So in a way, they don't overlap at all in kind of the modules and how it splits. The thinking and the skills that you kind of gain, that's where they kind of overlap a lot more. But so Complit in itself, a lot of the modules that I do, it just focus on more of the literature reading, the adaptation, and thinking about it as comparative literature as a whole, whereas my film studies consists a lot more about the theories and learning about film history past, but also looking at different theoretical like analysis that we can apply to modern films, to past films and adaptation. It's not in a way, they don't really combine. They are their own separate degrees, but you do have, they do interlink a lot just because they're also under the same school. So that makes it easier for us to communicate between, you know, between lecturers and staff. But
and
yeah.
I would just let me say as well, sorry, I know that the question was for Nu rather than for me, but even if you just look at what we've covered today, if you have experience of studying film and visual material, you're at such an advantage with looking at adaptation. And basically, there are lots of opportunities where you can bring the one to bear on the other. And finally, I think it's worth saying as well that in your final year, there are dissertations which enable you to actually bring together the various different skills. But I think it's really helpful to be thinking in terms of the skills that you're developing. And often they do kind of transfer across. But in terms of the actual sort of mechanics of it, it is two halves of the distinct degree programs. I'm going to just give you some information about how to find out more from us. So there's various different ways of getting in touch with me. So you've got my email address there. There's also various different social media accounts. You could also come and have a campus tour if you haven't yet been to Mile End. It's a really, really great part of London to live and work in. So I'd really encourage you to come and see us, and to please get in touch if you have any questions. The numbers vary depending on the years, but typically in your classes you will have anywhere between kind of 5 and 35, 40 people, I would say, in terms of your class sizes, on which I think, because I'm very conscious that we're just about to, I think, probably all be kicked out. And before that happens, which will be a bit brutal, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to Nu for being here, for you all for being here, for some really great interactions in the chat. It's been really interesting to hear your thoughts and experiences. It sounds like to me that there's lots of expertise already in this room, and I very much look forward to meeting you. I hope you will apply and come and study with us, and we'll see you therefore hopefully next year or the year after. Thanks very much.